Well, good morning, and if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn with me to John chapter 21. We are almost, sadly, getting to the conclusion of our Encounters with Jesus series for this spring, and today is a special one. I think it's one that many of us need to come back to over and over again. If you are familiar with John's Gospel, last week we were in John chapter 20. We were dealing with doubting Thomas, and if this is your first time, we have been going through in the spring just a journey through different people's encounters with Jesus. We've talked about some of the early ministry where he's healing the blind, he's calling Peter, he's raising Lazarus, he's dealing with Nicodemus, all these kind of moments. And the last 3 weeks we have dealt with post-resurrection moments. These moments where there's two disciples running out of town, they're just sad and discouraged, and the resurrected Jesus draws them back to himself. We dealt last week with doubting Thomas, with one who is just, unless I see evidence, I'm never gonna believe. I need to put my hand in his side or I'm not gonna believe. And Jesus draws him back. And now today we're gonna look at our next encounter with the post-resurrection Jesus, and that is we're gonna see an encounter of restoration. This is for those who are defeated. You feel like you're too far gone. You've made too many mistakes for God to use you, too much baggage, too much, kind of just failures in your life, and you don't know if God even cares anymore. You feel you're too far gone. And so if you've felt that, or maybe you're living in it now, there's a sin weighing you down, and maybe it's public, like Peter's we'll discuss, or maybe it's been a private one, but you just feel like God's kind of benched you. He's done with you, you're placed to the side, and now you just got to exist and kind of make your way through life. Today's for you. It can be a private sin, it can be a public sin, but I want us, and I think the Lord wants us, just to look at the life of Peter, and this moment in particular, and find not just peace and forgiveness and maybe some internal rest in our souls, but also a new mission. So we're gonna look together in John 21, and as we do so, Jesus is going to set the scene. A scene is going to be set. There's 4 stages through our passage today, so if you're taking notes, there'll be 4 main points and then kind of an application here at the end. But just to begin, John is going to lay out for you quite a bit of space. The first 14 verses is all just setting the scene for the interaction. Okay, so we're gonna go pretty fast, and you might wonder, why even include chapter 21? I mean, Jesus is risen from the dead. He's already had Thomas have this great climactic kind of proclamation that Jesus is his Lord and his God. Why not stop right there? Why add chapter 21 at all? And the reason is that, sure, like the greatest moment of human history has happened. Jesus has risen from the dead, but God has a greater plan still to come. He's got a people still to draw in, and Peter has a major role to play in that. And the mission must go on. Just as God sent the Son, so now Jesus will send his disciples. And there's one person in particular that needs to be on this journey. So let's look at the scene as it gets set. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, or Galilee, it's the same sea. And he revealed himself in this way: Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples were together. Don't you love how he just lists out all these, and and there's 2 others, they don't even get named. It's if you gotta guess, Andrew would be in there probably, and Philip. Those are my guesses, but who knows? John doesn't care, But they're there, and this part of the scene is, this isn't in Jerusalem, it's not in the upper room, it's not at the empty tomb, it's by the sea, all right? Not just that. Next, verses 3 down through 6 kind of give you what they're doing. It says, now verse 3, Simon Peter said to them, I'm going fishing. And they said to him, we'll go with you. And so they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know him or know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered him, no. And he said to them, cast the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. And so they cast it. And now they were unable to haul it in because the quantity of fish. It's not just that the location is familiar and helpful and kind of, known to these men. Now the experience of their first encounter is being relived. They're in a boat, they're out fishing, and they don't catch anything, okay? Does this feel very familiar to maybe Luke chapter 5 where Peter doesn't catch anything and he's with some friends and there's, those who were able to give testimony that it really happened. And as they're out fishing, it says that Jesus stood on the shore and he just says, hey, children, it's not derogatory. I think you could translate, hey, boys, or hey, guys, do you have any fish? And they just yell back, no, it's early morning. Nobody can really quite see. You find out a little bit later, they're about 100 yards from the shore. And so, they don't know who it is. And he just says, hey, just cast to the right side. And all of a sudden they catch this massive, amount of fish. They can't even haul it in. And then you see John, who seems to be just a little quicker than Peter. It just says that the disciple whom Jesus loved, therefore said to Peter, it's the Lord. And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for the work, and threw himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. That's great. Like John acts just like he did when the resurrection happened. John's the first kind of one to put all the pieces together and believe, and Peter's the one who just says, I gotta run to the tomb, and he starts running. In this case, John again says, it's the Lord on the shore. Peter just wraps his cloak around him and jumps in the water. Now, I've never swam 100, maybe I have swum 100 yards, but that's gonna take a minute. And if you're the other disciples, the other 6, they got some help. It's not probably an awful thing, but you're just like, come on, bro. We got this huge haul, and you're just gonna swim out on us like that? We gotta bring your load back, So anyways, Peter's very active. He feels like he has to do something, and so he does. There's this moment where he wants to be with Jesus. He wants to be near him. He's not fully naked, but you can't fish well in a robe. So everybody just tuck your nice clothes over to the side. He straps them on himself and just dives in. He's got to get to Jesus. So the scene is again being set. Some have wondered, is this Peter going back to fishing? You can hear this passage preached sometimes that Peter felt his denial was so bad that he went away and he's just gonna go back and be a fisherman again, and he's abandoned Jesus. When you put the whole scene together, I don't take it that way. Maybe you can, I've heard it preached that way, but it seems to me that when the angels appeared to the ladies and they said to the ladies, hey, tell the disciples he will meet them in Galilee, just as he told them. The disciples go back to Galilee, and while they're waiting, man, what better way to just wait around than to just go fishing? They might even can make some money. They might be able to have a nice breakfast. So they just go fishing. But Jesus turns this kind of waiting period for himself into a moment of restoration and teaching. And so Peter jumps in the water. He swims back faster than the others. Of course, he can do that because they're going to carry his net for him. That's nice. But we're not quite done. Here's the rest of the scene. We find in verse 9, when they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid on it and bread. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. They couldn't help themselves. You got to count it. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? For they knew it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. Now, this was the third time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he had been raised from the dead. Now, a couple of things just to kind of keep the scenery and the kind of the moment going. This is the same shore, and this is the same kind of fishing moment that Jesus had first called the disciples to follow him. This is the place they had grown up. This is where they first encounter this preaching, traveling Messiah, and he has invited them into a relationship. And again, in this moment, he is inviting them into another relationship. When you share a meal, you are sharing intimacy. You're sharing a connection, even more so back in the first century and in this Middle East and in the first century, Judaism. So this was a big, intense, and yet intimate moment, and yet it is done around a charcoal fire. Charcoal only appears in John's gospel in two places. The first is in the courtyard where a bunch of Roman soldiers and servants of the high priest are gathered around, and Peter is warming himself by the fire. And they accuse him of being one of Jesus' disciples. It's around the charcoal fire that Peter denies Jesus. And so Jesus is building this scene. He is building a moment where he is going to kind of restore Peter, and he does it to remind Peter. He does it in such a way that he reminds him of his past and how he was called and how he was brought into a relationship with Jesus, and yet he also doesn't hide the pain and the denial and the embarrassment that Peter claimed Jesus to be. In fact, this is how Matthew puts it. He says, when Peter denied the Lord, it says he denied him before them all, saying, I don't know what you mean. Later on, again, he denied it with an oath. I don't know the man. And in Matthew 26, chapter 26, 74, then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear that I do not know him. And immediately the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the saying that before the rooster crow, you would deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. So Peter swims to the shore. He's excited to see Jesus. He's reminded of those moments at the beginning, and yet Jesus also reminds him, just the smell of the charcoal. I remember Peter. And we got to deal with this. Jesus said to them, come and have some breakfast. I think I've already read some of this. This is the 3rd time he was raised from the dead. So this is the scene. Jesus is doing it. Jesus has brought it about. He could have let the guys fish and catch nothing and come back and meet him somewhere else. But no, Jesus had a plan. And he has set the scene. And this is a scene to remind Peter of all that he's experienced and all the good that God has done in his life and how he's used him on these different journeys and all of these things. And yet he's also going to remind him of his own failure just to set this up. Okay? Now, this is what happens next. So after the scene has been set, a relationship needs to be restored. Here's what happens in verse 15 down through 17. What we're gonna do is we're gonna break this into 2 parts. So I'm gonna skip the parts about his commissioning and what he's supposed to do. We're just gonna deal with the scriptures dealing with the relationship. I know it's kind of small font, but you have your Bibles open. So 15 down to 19 or 15 down to 17 deals with this relationship. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Okay, verse 16. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. Verse 17 now. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said it to him the third time. Do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. There is no doubt that Jesus is making Peter relive that denial moment, but he's allowing him to change his tune. He's allowing him to walk it back. And just as this was a public denial around with a bunch of servants and a bunch of soldiers, so also now Peter is going to have to do this publicly again, except this time he has to do it to his friends, to the ones that he's also hurt, not just to the Lord that he denied, but also to the friends who looked to him and he led. And notice that Jesus doesn't call him Peter, the rock. He calls him Simon. Peter couldn't live up to that name yet. And so he says, Simon, do you love me more than these? That's a little odd, right? So you've got two options. If you kind of took that Peter was abandoning his discipleship and he was gonna go and just be a professional fisherman again and quit loving Jesus and serving him and just kind of do his own thing, some will take this passage to say that Jesus is asking him, Peter, do you love me more than these fish? You love me more than that job? And Peter will say, yes, I love you more than these. But I think, this is a public question. They're all still around the breakfast fire. And he looks at Peter and he says, Peter, do you love me more than these other guys? You feel like you love me more than John and Thomas, Nathaniel, these two other dudes we don't know? You feel like you love me more than them? And remember, Peter did. He did think that he loved them more than them. Remember what he says all throughout, but this is in Matthew 26:33. Peter's answered Jesus, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. So Peter's confidence in himself, Peter's I can do it if I just set my mind to it. His confidence in his abilities and in his own, commitment was so great. In the moment when Jesus says, God's gonna strike the shepherd and all the sheep are gonna scatter, Peter says, not me, Lord. I don't care about these other schmoes. I don't care about all these other dudes. I will never leave you. He believed he loved Jesus more than everybody else. And he's just gone through this physical moment where even though he was a professional fisherman, he could catch nothing. He needed Jesus for the catch. Even though he loved Jesus, he couldn't love Jesus on his own, by himself, in his own strength. He needed Jesus to help him love Jesus. Peter's answers in these moments, do you love me more than these, is respectively, no. I love you, and that's got to be enough. I can't say I love you more than John loves you. I can't say that I love you more than Nathaniel loves you. I can't say that I love you more than Thomas loves you. All I can say is, I love you. That's it. And he says it 3 times. No doubt that third one really stung. It even says it grieved him. I can imagine, I don't know if he went out weeping bitterly, but I can imagine some tears just coming down his face and running into his beard. Lord, you know all things. You know I love you. Jesus wasn't okay with just rising from the dead, kind of opening up this resurrection moment and saying, boom, I'm God. He wanted Peter's heart again. And maybe you're here today and you feel a little bit like Peter. You feel a little bit kind of, you and the Lord, you're just not quite right. You're living your life, you're doing your thing, but there is a divide, there's a separation, there's this kind of wall or unconfessed sin in your soul right now, and you don't feel close. You know it, he knows it, and maybe today the scene has been set for you. And Jesus is asking you this morning, do you love me? And maybe in your heart you can say, yes, Lord, I do love you. Sometimes the past and the guilt can just keep haunting you. In these moments, the goodness of God says, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to keep living it. Jesus brings it up, asks Peter about it, and then allows him to move on. Maybe the sin that you're just still carrying was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and you just keep beating yourself up and beating yourself up and beating yourself up. But notice that Peter doesn't have to be baptized. Peter doesn't have to go through a bunch of, jobs. Jesus just offers him forgiveness and restores him. It's a gift. It's always been a gift. As a Christian here today, man, maybe you were running a ministry, and maybe you were leading a Bible study, and maybe you're doing something super amazingly awesome. And some sin crept in and you feel like God can't use you anymore. The first step is a restored relationship, but he doesn't stop there. Here's the next thing. He gives them a mission to accept. Throughout this whole passage, he doesn't let Peter turn inward, okay? If you are kind of an introvert, you like to kind of, the internals matter a lot, and you want to feel genuine, you want to feel authentic. Sometimes you can allow guilt and shame just to beat you up over and over and over again. And so what Jesus does in the midst of restoring the relationship is also gives Peter a job. He doesn't let him kind of be overwhelmed and overcome by the past or by his own sin. He makes him lift his eyes and see out beyond. So in between each one of these, Peter, do you love me? He asks him to do something. He asks him to feed my lambs, tend my sheep, and feed my sheep over and over. Peter, do you love me? Yes, I love you. Okay, great. We're done with this. Now go feed my lambs. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. Okay, great. Get your eyes off yourself, stop feeling pity, and get out and tend some sheep. Peter, do you love me? And Peter is again grieved, but at the end, he says, feed my sheep. You can't say that you love Jesus and hate the church. You can't say that you love the bridegroom and talk trash about the bride. Peter is called to a renewed relationship. He's called to kind of get his own heart right with God, but then he doesn't get to just stop moving and just be like, okay, God, Jesus, we're done. Why don't you just bring the kingdom back? God's got a mission for the man, and the mission is he's got to go and do something. He's got a mission to accept, and the mission is he is called to go and love and serve and lead this about to be established church. There's all kinds of synonyms and parallels throughout this passage. There's actually two words used for fish. If you have heard this sermon before, you've probably heard the two terms used for love, agape and phileo. There's two words used for what Peter's to do. He's to feed and he's to tend or oversee or take care of. There's two words for sheep used of lamb and sheep. There's all kinds of these little parallels back and forth. The major idea is Peter is not to get his eyes on himself, and he's not to be overwhelmed by the sin of his past. He's to get his eyes on what God's got for his future. Forgetting those things which are behind, I set my eyes on the prize of the high calling of Jesus Christ. That's how Paul will say it. Paul could have gotten crippled by causing and leading people to death because of his arrests and imprisonments, and yet Paul has to be able to lay that behind. He doesn't forget that it happened. Peter doesn't forget that it happens, but he's got to be able to move through it so he can do the job. And we might be like, yes, this is where it should stop. Like, let's just pause here. This is a beautiful moment. But Jesus doesn't let it stop, because there's a price to be paid if you're gonna do this. If you're here today and you're not a Christian, this is really how the Christian life should work. Jesus takes the initiative to save us. He cares about your heart, he cares about my heart more than anything that you can do or anything that you can accomplish. The heart comes first. And most of the church failures and all of the kind of moral failings, they all come because we put the work before the heart. But the heart always comes first, and then comes the work. But Jesus doesn't throw any punches. He doesn't hide anything from us, because the fourth step is this. Peter is reminded there is a cross to carry. Here's what happens in verses 18 and 19. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, You will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he, being Peter, was going to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, follow me. When you see, you have this little euphemism in there, sometimes in this day they would use, we still use this, those who are asleep, that's kind of a way to say they've died. In this case, someone else will stretch out your hands is a euphemism for, you're gonna get crucified, Peter. That's how you're gonna die. Some of us might want to know, there's even these like little parables about if you only knew how you were gonna die. If it was gonna be a heart attack, you'd take really good care of your heart. If it was gonna be cancer, maybe you change some diet, kind of lower sugar content or something like that. If you knew you were gonna die in a car wreck, it would be kind of not, maybe you wouldn't drive anymore. Like there's all these ways, but most of us kind of would probably agree it's best not to know. Not Peter. Peter finds out how he's gonna die. Jesus just tells him his future. He says, Peter, I want you to tend and care for the sheep. I know you love me. I know you didn't, kind of walk away. It was a pressurized moment when you denied me. We have been restored. Your work has been restored. And I want you to know where it's going to lead you, Peter. It's going to lead you to also be crucified. But as you stay faithful and you don't deny me anymore, this is the way in which you will glorify my Father. Now follow me. Now, we can, if you're like you and I, you can kind of say, yeah, that sounds great. We should end there. Follow me. Peter didn't let you in there because Peter's Peter. So Peter, this is what he does. We're not going to read all these verses, but we'll get through quite a few. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following them, the one who had leaned back against him during the supper and had said, Lord, who is it that was going to betray you? Peter saw him, and Peter said to Jesus, Lord, what about this man? Jesus said to him, if it's my will, if he remains until I come, what is that to you? Follow me. We're going to stop there. That's how it should end, right? Peter still, he is so real. He just fumbles forward even at the end. Right? He's been restored. He's been made whole. He's kind of restored that relationship. He's been recommissioned into the ministry. Peter, you're still going to be the leader because I want you to, and I choose you to be that. You're going to feed my sheep, and I'm going to tell you how you're going to die because next time you won't act like Simon. You'll act like Peter. And Peter's like, okay, but what about John? Like, I'm going to get crucified. Is he going to get crucified? And Jesus just says, mind your own business. And Peter just is like, okay, that's how the gospel's it doesn't quite end like that. John smooths it out. But that's how the chapter ends with Peter. He's just that real kind of guy. He's just a real human being. You can imagine Peter, yes, I'm never going to make another mistake. He can't get out of the chapter before making another mistake. So here's the deal. God is not done with you yet. He's not done. You might say, yeah, this is Peter though. Like he gets a chapter of the Bible for his restoration. I feel like I'm not him. Well, you might think that, but Peter doesn't think that. In fact, in 1 Peter, you can find all three of these points. The scene's different because we're 2,000 years removed, but this is your scene. You're in College Station or you're watching online, wherever you're at, and God has drawn you to this moment, and whatever needs to be restored or mission accepted, go do it. If you go to 1 Peter, you'll find verses such as this, though you have not seen him, yet you love him. Do you love me? You find in chapter 2, verse number 10, once you were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you've received mercy. Jesus has forgiven us. Maybe it's the mission. When Peter says, or Peter is told, tend or feed my sheep, he gives that same mission to every elder all throughout the known church as he writes, I, as just another elder, offer to you the same mission. shepherd the flock of God that is among you. And to all the sheep, he says this, desire the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby and know that the Lord is good. He just gives his own commission to us. And last, I use 1 Peter 4, 12 and 13, but we could have used any number of places in Jesus' own words, take up your cross and follow me, but here's 1 Peter's. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trials when they come to test you, as though something strange has happened to you, but rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. So, today, this is the word. God's not done with you yet. Maybe you've fallen, maybe you've denied your Lord, maybe you've sinned in some way you feel like you cannot recover from. It's just not true. Just as God loved and restored Peter, he's calling you today to himself. He's already set the scene. You're already here. Whatever throat, whatever kind of virus thing's going around that's knocked out so many people, it didn't knock you out. Or if it did, you're powering through it, way to go. You know, you're here. Like, the scene is set. And if you are carrying this weight of shame of a past sin, give it to the Lord. He's already died for it. He's already risen from the dead. Receive him and his love again. Maybe you're here today and you're not a Christian. Friend, what this Jesus did for Peter, he offers to you. He offers you a relationship with God. And he offers you a new life and a new purpose and a new mission in life. And he offers it to you not because you deserve it and not because you've earned it. He just offers it because he's good and he's gracious. And God's not done with you yet. And he asks you today to put your faith in his son, in the one who died and rose again, and receive new life. And Christian here today, are you living on the mission? Maybe you say, oh, I love Jesus, but I can't stand him, Christian people. Well, you can't love the bridegroom and hate his bride. There's a mission in and through the people of God that we're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. But he still wants to use you. And he still wants to use us. And it's going to mean we're going to suffer some. There's always a cross to carry. So with your heads bowed and eyes closed, this is just a time to reflect. It's a time to just go inside your own heart and let the Holy Spirit talk and speak to you. What is it that you need to respond to the Lord today? Maybe today it's that relationship. Receive the forgiveness. Don't let your past fail. Don't be blinded to them, but don't be bound by them either. Maybe today, you know you're forgiven, and it's time to step up and get on mission. And maybe today it's just a reminder, life is hard. And God doesn't promise us just a bed of roses and a nice, smooth, comfy life. There's a cross to carry. But whatever it is, let the Lord and the Holy Spirit speak to you and respond to him. If at the end of the service there's questions or concerns, things you want to process through, the pastors will be out in the hallway, elders will be out in the hallway, deacons will be out in the hallway. You don't have to leave today still in doubt and still in question. We want to help you. We can't be God to you, but we just want to help and walk and guide as best we can. So, friend, do work with God right now. And if you're still wrestling to be done, you can meet us out in the foyer. But take a moment to just be with God, receive his forgiveness, accept his mission, pick up that cross, and follow